maybe I can just like quickly introduce myself. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with openers. So Julie invited me actually as we work with a lot of international tech companies when they're launching on the German market. So that's my kind of main expertise, supporting them with PR, event strategy, mainly digital over the past year for sure, as well as strategy and paid channels. So if there's anything, yeah, I can in particular address like about joining the German market or moving to the German market, then I'm happy to answer your questions. Um, Maybe I just like share my screen again and walk you through a couple of slides. Then it maybe is more tangible for everyone here.
I'm going to mute myself. It's really loud in my place. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
I'm sorry.
No worries at all. So maybe I'm not sure if someone of you also joined this morning. We had a session with Ströer and 7-One Media. Now we discussed a lot about media itself. So actually, there's like kind of 3 things you should be aware of when you are entering the German market, which is the market itself for sure, media, and then what are your actual clients, who's the target audience. So that basically sums up to the PR efforts that we usually focus on. It's not just like kind of you easily call some journalists or you just click and press and send a MailChimp press release to like 200 media outlets there. So I'm not sure how familiar you are in particular with PR work. So usually it's really about the timing, the storyline itself. So when do we send out what kind of message to what journalists? So that's our daily job. And we do that especially for tech companies. We've been also working with some companies originally coming from Israel, which is kind of maybe why Jilly also thought about us, inviting us to this event, maybe for about Cloudinary or ViaVan. There are some companies we used to work with also like on the PR side. Maybe diving a bit more into detail here. So like if we talk about media, it's for sure not only about the outlets itself, to have a look what target audience you want to reach in what segment. So we usually do like a vertical by vertical approach. Let's say you're kind of a B2B company. Even within B2B, there are very many different segments and different specialized journalists that we usually approach. A main pillar also of the work is really to understand the market. So that's kind of our main expertise, to understand the German market in particular, German-speaking one. Not only B2B, but also B2C. And then it's really about data crunching, so especially last year has shown that like this classical product news is not really something that actually gets through to any journalist desk. It's rather about data, stories, surveys, to really kind of stick out of the mass. Because in particular in Germany and also the UK, we work with some agencies over there. Many media houses also like had some kind of the short-term work, had to decrease the hours of working due to Corona pandemic. So that's actually why it was even harder to get through. And any kind of data-driven storytelling was super helpful here. And then I think last but not least, it's about the client, the product, or the people behind the product. Also, that's getting more and more important. What kind of stories can we actually create out of the personal background? For example, like something that works pretty well usually if there's someone who is maybe not kind of universitarian background, maybe did something totally different and then actually ended up as a founder. So these are kind of the stories that people are really interested in. Also, the number of personal formats really increased over the past years. So we'll find that basically in all of the different media verticals, media assets, that there's also more about personal branding behind that company and the product, which ultimately makes it a bit more tangible for everyone. So I think we have a couple of more people who joined. So if anyone wants to kind of take part here as an interactive session. So I did not plan to just hold a presentation. Feel free to join the stage. I think you just have to press the blue button on top and then you should be able to join. Otherwise, if you have any questions, just feel free to add them to the chat and I'm happy to address these. Maybe I just like tell you a bit more about like how we usually work. For those who came a bit later, we work with a lot of international tech companies. You might know Pipedrive. You probably heard about Vintage, which formerly was called Kleiderkreisel in Germany. We used to work with ViaBan, who came from Israel to the US and then back to Germany. And our main job is basically supporting them with PR communication efforts, getting their messages through into the wide and mass media, but also into trade publications. So what we usually do is really sit down with any kind of client, have a dedicated kickoff session, see what people are behind their business, what stories are to reveal about that. And then as a next step, really work on strategy and concept. It's not just that we usually get a press release and spread it out to the wild German media audience. That's just not working anymore. It might work, however, for some of the classical B2C topics, sorry. And at the same time, also like the creative part gets more and more important. Also visual storytelling is getting more and more important, because like we think it's really important to implement all of the channels, not only classical PR, but also paid influencers, social media, and for sure also like professional networks like LinkedIn, for example, like when it comes to employer branding. Then it's time for the kind of groundwork, really setting all of the wording straight. I think something we discussed in the session this morning was, if you have a look at the German audience, if culture is a big topic, and yes, it is. It's not like with French people, for example, like the Germans are super keen on having always stuff in German. Maybe this applies a bit more to the French market. However, if you want to get your message across properly, even if it's just a single claim, make sure you have that in a proper German. You have some best case local person working with you in the team, or you work with some freelancer, some agency, just to make sure that you can address what you want to sell ultimately in the best way to your target audience. I already mentioned then kind of media work, content creation. It's also a big part. It's not about just kind of working step by step, and you have a plan at hand, and you just kind of execute that. Usually, it's a lot about iteration, working with feedback from journalists, and getting that into your kind of messaging. Iterate. It's like building a product just on a PR level. For those of you who are also like working in the product field, then for sure, evaluating the outcomes and make it as much as tangible as possible. Just moving further to some of the instruments that usually work on the German level. So usually there's specific daily economic newspapers. Some of you maybe have heard about Handelsblatt or Wirtschaftswoche. I think Gilly was featured this morning in Stern, which is not a classical trade publication. However, kind of there's also like a more kind of conservative target audience to reach with that kind of publications. Also, print is still alive in Germany, which I think is important to mention. Then for sure you have different B2B specific outlets. So that's something where you can more like in depth reach out to the target audience you want to have, especially like if you want to kind of tailor-made the content, you just have to make sure that this is really then a bit more in depth, a bit more product or close to the product. And for example, like you would not necessarily address a classical how to digitize your business in a classical B2B outlet. I think that's something more for the economy business papers. I already mentioned language. It's all the time about German. There's almost no outlets in Germany for English natives. Then there's also like a couple of kind of economic print and tech outlets, but the number is very limited. So that means you cannot just like kind of spread your message widely. You really have to kind of create single plugs for each and every journalist that is out there, because there's not only a couple of startups that want to get the message across. It's probably hundreds of thousands. So you'll sometimes even find the funny kind of fails of like of startup PR that some of the journalists share on LinkedIn. So just make sure you have your story straight in that sense. For those of you who are interested in that presentation, I can share that afterwards. So just feel free to contact me. So I'm just kind of moving a bit quicker with that. I think if you have a look at the tools you could use, there's for sure still something called press release. I'm pretty familiar with everyone, I guess. The question you always need to ask yourself, is there any really news value? I mean, it might be a value and the news for you. Let's just take a product update as an example. It might be nice for you in the company that you achieved a certain milestone, and it might be actually also relevant for the customers, but you have to convince the journalist that it's relevant to him or her and not to the customers, because actually the value proposition needs to be strong for the media, because they decide on what do my readers want and not what do your customers want, if that makes sense. So that's why you usually have to play around a bit with that. Always super important. Same applies to investor relations, same applies to media relations. It's always good if you know those people who work at the news desk. So we also set up personal meetings, background conversations, off the record sometimes, just to kind of build that relationship, to prepare for the time when you maybe have news or funding round coming, etc. Then there's for sure kind of classical one-to-one interviews, which is probably common sense all over the globe. You can actually sometimes even get directly quoted. So there's also like some things to consider about that, what you actually want to reveal, what's probably off the record. But that's something where like a proper briefing should help any founder or spokesperson of your company. Press conference last year, I think 1 or 2 maybe that worked in a proper way. I mentioned that already a bit earlier. So it was pretty hard to get like through all of this different noise. I mean, like the noise around Corona, the impact on the general kind of economy was just way more than before, like one of the single crises, like banking, end of the 2009, 2010, for example. So any kind of press conference usually is not the tool of choice I'd go for. And what worked pretty well instead. And the nice thing about that is guest and expert articles. So basically, it's kind of content coming from your end, from your spokesperson. You pitch that to media in a proper way, and you are free to kind of create like an opinion piece. The nice thing around that, I mean, it's a lot of more work for sure. You have to put more kind of time into copywriting. However, nice part of that is you can actually control in that sense what message you get across to that audience. Some outlets for sure do some kind of editorial proof, so they might twist and tweak a bit, but it's always a bit more. I mean, there's not so much pressure as like in a live interview. So usually for any company, it's a bit easier in that sense to get across like the direct core messaging of the company, of the product, of the spokesperson. Any questions so far? I think, Lee, you're still the only one who's visible. So like, if you have a question, feel free to unmute and interrupt me.
Yeah, thank you.
Any question, or should I can move on then? I mean, something we experienced a lot is kind of there was a mismatch of what founders, C-levels were expecting in terms of journalists and kind of them writing about the company. Same applies also like to a lot of US companies. It's a different world over there. I mean, there's usually not only one company in the market. I think one of the examples that most of you would be probably familiar with is electro scooters. So there's companies like Voi, Cirque. I mean, they're not Cirque anymore, Lime, Birch, you name them. And I think some of that kind of mobility journalists, they got like press releases every day, basically. So that really shows, even if you have like a bigger funding round in that sense, it's not necessarily guaranteeing you any kind of coverage. So also like in that sense, again, you have to make sure to have another story in petto to get across that message. A couple of don'ts and do's. I'm not going to talk about all of them. As mentioned, I can share that presentation. I mentioned already that something which is too product focused usually is not working, because journalists are missing kind of the meta level story about that. Let's say if you just developed a great integration for your software platform, which might be relevant for a lot of enterprise companies, it's not relevant for a public audience. So why should any kind of business economy journalists write about that? The other way around, if you can prove, for example, like how that kind of API really increases productivity or saves a lot of money, that's something you can then again address to the kind of target audience and C-level readership in that kind of economy outlets. But that's kind of the way how you actually need to twist and tweak that stories until it's really not only tangible for the journalists, but also like for that readers. I think I mentioned that before. And that's the job usually, your agency, your freelancer, your internal PR and communications people should take over. I mentioned number 3 already, not moving too widely, rather send out only 10 emails, but 10 emails that really kind of where the content fits the journalists, instead of sending out 100. People tend to blacklist you if you're spreading too much emails. Subject lines, I think that's something also like applies to being visible out of the mass. Probably if there's some marketeers around here, it's really the same game for PR. Just make sure you have a catchy subject line, in short, telling the story, the key message of what you want to tell. Do's, I already mentioned that specific story. Then relevant news. There's some news, like if there's like a bigger funding round, for sure, make sure you address that to that outlets. I think honesty is also something super important. It will always backfire if you're promising too much, and then you're kind of struggling in a Q&A with the press journalists. Always make sure you're only teasing stuff in the pitch that you also, like in a conversation, can actually talk about. For example, like if you say our revenue increased by 500%, people look into the numbers and then they will find something different. It will backfire. Also, something usually which is done by journalists, they also have a look at competitors. So just make sure what you, for example, like also like talk about any competitors out there. Then maybe just for those who joined a bit later, I can just say a couple of words about ourselves. So we are openers. I'm Toby Lee. I already introduced myself. Whoever is there again, sorry if you missed that piece in the beginning. I'm working in that industry like since 10 years already. I have been a founder myself. Back in that days, I started an ed tech company. So we built a platform for schools, for teachers, for parents and kids, which is a bit funny because that's still kind of some relevant topic right now. With all of the homeschooling, not sure about the situation in Israel at the moment. I think it's a bit better than here. And then since 5 years, I work with openers, mainly supporting foreign companies when they join the German market, but also some other European markets like the UK, Benelux, so Netherlands, Belgium, or France. We work with some agency partners over there just to make sure that we can also address your needs in that market. We also have a couple of co-working spaces in Berlin. Probably not the right time to move like an entire office here. Also, we have a conference going on usually every year, which is called Tech Open Air, which might be familiar with some of you. One of the largest ones in Europe with 20,000 people. So for this year, for sure, it will be virtual as well. There's a roadshow also planned. So maybe feel free to follow that on all of the social channels. I think the main piece of work we do is really communications on all of the channels. I think that's something I addressed earlier. But also digital events, so stuff like we are all in right now, something we usually produce for clients. We've done that, for example, like for investors like Speed Invest, Cygnus Ventures, which is investment arm of Signal Iduna, for example. We've been working with Vira for a couple of times, which is part of Telefonica, but also on the kind of more kind of music industry side, for example, like with Spotify, we've been working since a couple of years now, or Eventbrite. So there's also like a bunch of good names that we work with in that events field. And then that digital innovation part rather applies to any kind of more corporate level, but also on the strategy and then kind of go-to-market strategy for startups and scale-ups. Just a quick word on the founders. So we have 2 female founders, which I think is pretty nice. Kerstin and Caroline founded Openness 7 years ago, basically out of Tech Open Air, which was usually just a kind of single conference used by companies even back then. Companies like Airbnb have been part here in the Berlin ecosystem, but then it was more about consistent storytelling over the years. And so that's how kind of the agency arm got into place. And yeah, that's something we're doing since 7 years now. So feel free to reach out if there's any questions. If you're thinking about launching your product, your company on the German market, reach out. Some credentials for sure, some of the companies. If you're looking for some very specific references, then yeah, just let me know. I think that's in terms of slides. Are there any questions? Can't see anything.
I think it's just the 3 of us, like you, me, and the support from Hawk.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It shows there are 6 people watching. I'm not sure. So not sure if there's any other questions. If it's only the 3 of us, well, then you had a very private one-on-one conversation with me.
I have a very hey, okay, so I have so I'm not sure who's here except for us, but I told earlier that I'm a graphic designer and I specialize in conference design and deck design. So my field of knowledge in all terms of media and PR comes mostly from social media. Mm-hmm. And so is very, very, very specific. Like when you get a new client from abroad, it doesn't matter from where. It can be Europe, it can be anywhere. How do you approach learning their brands or language or way they interact with people in order to get to them the right way? Yeah,
I think it's a kind of a process. In many different steps. I think number one, very classical, we have a kind of questionnaire asking for kind of the brand message, what resonates with the target audience, any specific adjectives. So it's like kind of a classical questionnaire you usually run by the client before you actually start into the project. Sometimes you'll find companies that already have brand and messaging in place, who maybe worked with some external partner before, some maybe don't have that one. So that's a very different approach some of the companies have. Sometimes young companies are like kind of very well set up and have made their thoughts and homework on that. I think more often, like there's also like the case that some companies actually are changing that kind of core messaging and branding as a learning like from the market. I mean, one example I think I can share, Eventbrite, I think 5 years back, they were joining the German market. It wasn't really about the messaging and branding. However, they were just kind of accepting credit card payments, which was just not common on the German market. And if you kind of tailor-made all of your kind of communication parts and messaging on you can pay by credit, then you have to come back and address that in a different way. So even on that very top level, this could happen. But also, like usually, it's just part of a kickoff workshop, and you really dedicatedly look into that. And then it's on us usually to kind of translate it back to the German market, because like some products and some messaging you can actually more or less directly translate. Sometimes some other terms, they just not resonate with the German audience. Yeah. I think that the same might apply to Israel. There are some terms that work in English and they're already common into the ecosystem, like anything around digitization for sure. And there's other stuff, if it's about a very, very specific vertical, it's just not working if you just directly translate it. So that's kind of then the granular work we take over.
Amazing. And how do you decide what fits the best for a client? Like, let's say a client saying to you that he only wants, I don't know, I don't have any idea. Clients come with a specific request, but you as a company, as a PR company, thinks that I don't know, that they need to work it out in a different way. How do you choose the segments for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the kickoff workshop. So usually we do the research beforehand. We matchmake that with the staff, all of the kind of input we get from the client. And then it's also on us, like, to really challenge that. I mean, we could just say, okay, well, we just execute what your kind of internal strategy has been. We're kind of long enough in the market to see and to base that on our experience. If that's not going to work, and then we will just address that. So that's, I think, one of the do's, transparency. You have to be honest about that, because also for us, we just don't want to work on projects where we feel they are going to fail if we're not addressing that there might be specific issues. It's no fun for us, no fun for the client. So that's part of the kickoff workshop before you actually reach out to any media, to any before you pay any budget on paid channels, etc.
I wasn't ready to go on stage and ask questions. I don't have anything else.
No worries. Yeah. I think also, like, we're over time. I learned this morning there. Yeah, usually we can just like stretch this as long as we want. I don't know, Gilly, if you have any question, or Vadim. Otherwise, yeah, just feel free to contact me afterwards. I mean, Gilly, we will be in touch anyways. Yeah, and then if there's no other questions, Vadim, then I'd say, yeah, we're finished. Thanks for taking part.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was really interesting.
Yeah, hope so. And yeah, if there's any follow-up questions, also like on the events segment, Germany, as I learned, you're also like working.
Contact you.
Yeah, feel free. I can also like then do a contact to the events team that we have, because there, have been a lot of changes over the past year, especially in that digital events ecosystem. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.